Welcome to this episode of the Skillsminer Podcast. In today's episode, we're joined by Lynsey Sweeney, Managing Director for Communities That Work. She'll be joining myself, Dinah Turner, and Kirsty Mitchell, CEO and founder of Skillsminer, to discuss some of the challenges in the housing sector at the moment. So, without further delay, I'll hand over to Kirsty Mitchell to get the podcast started.
Good to have everybody on board this week. And my goodness, we have a guest. Thank you for joining us, Lynsey. And we're all very new to this podcast game, so we're just going to jump right into our kind of questions today. Can you give us a little bit of a background about who you are and where you're from, and then we'll get going with everything today. Thank you for joining us, first of all.
Thank you, Kirsty. Hi, Dina. That what your name and where do you come from reminds me of Blind Date, circa 1980, 1990s with Still Black. But that's
Promise
the last.
No sliding.
Yeah.
We're not going to sing. We're not going to do any Stiller acts next one.
No, not a promise.
Okay, cool. So it's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me to join your podcast. I'm Lynsey Sweeney. I'm the MD, Managing Director of Communities That Work. And we are a small membership body who our members are from the social housing sector. We've been around for about 14 years, and we work across the social housing sector in England, and we focus only on one thing, which is the relationship between social housing as a sector, employment services, and government, and all tiers of government. So we are a sort of boutique agency of members, and we seek to lobby and influence and inform our government partners of the role of social housing and employment together. So that's us in a nutshell.
Wow, Lynsey, that's quite a lot. It's a big nutshell.
It is.
It's quite a big nutshell. And so, how did you end up doing what you do, Lynsey?
Well, this is probably the worst possible advert for any kind of careers advice, because I've kind of gone around like a ball in the world, it feels to me, and sort of finding opportunities and working with people and organisations that I've liked. And I have to say, I've never sort of written out or conceived of a career plan over, say, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I imagine that would be quite a wonderful and lovely thing to do, actually, but it isn't what I did. And as I reach almost the grand half century now, nearly 50, I can reflect back that I've enjoyed my working life, despite not having a written out career plan at the age of 18 or 21 or 30.
Yeah.
So in terms of, I suppose, how I've arrived here as managing director, so I've been doing it since the company Communities That Work founded. We're a not-for-profit company, incorporated around 8 years ago, and before that it was a sort of informal group of chief executives and government leads who were interested in social housing and employment. Before it incorporated, I met Communities That Work whilst I was freelancing. And I was a freelancer for about 10 years in employment and skills, and latterly in social housing. So I accepted an invitation really to freelance within the National Housing Federation for a couple of years on apprenticeships. And that's how I moved into Communities That Work. Sort of going right back, and I suppose the foundations of what I'm interested in and what pulls me along through working days and projects and programs is people. I'm really interested and fascinated by people, what motivates them, how to learn from others, listen to others, and actually really going back for a good 10 years, I worked both overseas and here in the placement of people in jobs overseas, in international development, and then more recently in colleges and apprenticeship settings in jobs and apprenticeships here in the UK. So whilst I've never worked for a sort of commercial recruitment agency here in the UK, I've done quite a lot of people placement over the years, which then translated into more voluntary charitable work, which then translated into further education. In London, I worked in an FE college and then moved into apprenticeships and then moved through freelance into housing and employment and skills. So people and learning from others and understanding what people want and need and placing them into it has been a real sort of driver and an interest from early days in my career. So I think enjoying the company of people, I'm trying to understand where people are coming from, has been an absolute bedrock of the work I do.
Well, that's brilliant. It's really interesting to think about that, actually.
And you can see the connections through even to the existing programs now, you know, and I look back on even my own career journey to what's led to this point. And then, you know, how other people come in and they engage with your organisation and the skills and things that they bring to the table and their experiences. And I really, for me, the hub of this is our heartlands, is our communities, and is housing, you know, and you know, what role do you really think, you know, when I think about, you've brought the employability and skills programs to that, but housing and that sense of community, what does that really mean to you in that sense, Lynsey?
Yeah, I think you're right, Kirsty. It's kind of at the heart of very many parts of our lives, right? For everybody, whether you are rich or poor or somewhere in the middle, where you live and your home and your community matters to you. And, you know, social housing, although we don't have enough of it in all the places we need, at its best is home and community for people. And it's also security for people. So whilst I've enjoyed quite a flexible career, where I can move around and I can, you know, do different jobs and work on different platforms and all the rest of it, behind that, I've had somewhere that is quite secure for me to call home all the way through that, you know, whether that's the same place or a different place. I've had the security of feeling at home and I can be there for as long as I want. And I think social housing does that for millions of people. You know, that's not to say that other types of tenure, whether you're an owner occupier or whether you're in the private rented sector, they're just different. You know, there's nothing good, bad or wrong with any of these types of living. But social housing provides security for people who are working but who can't necessarily afford commercial rents or can't afford a deposit or can't afford a mortgage in the area where they live and work and where they're bringing up children or having a family or supporting their family community. So it's really important to enable people who have lives and have you know, a way of life and are present in a local area to actually stay there and stay contributing to local communities. It's about security, safety, and some dignity at home. So I'm all for the private rented sector. I've used it myself and I've been moving around to different places, but I think it's somewhat overtaken the market. And perhaps too many people, and especially families, are living in private rented or insecure accommodation when actually what they probably need at this stage of life is a bit more security and some steadiness in where they are, so they can create their networks, make friends, have, if they've got children, place them in school knowing they're going to stay there for as long as they want and need them to, have childcare groups, all those things that make life livable, right? They're about people and connections and placing yourself in an area. If you can't do that, life's much harder. So social housing has a big role to play in that.
Yeah, there's a definite mental load in there for everybody who's in that risky position. Yeah, that's going to make everything they do more difficult.
It does.
Is there sort of big challenges in that space right now? What do you think are the big challenges that are happening in there?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of big challenges in social housing. I think, you know, I'm not sure any sector, whether it's health or care or housing or education, would ever say everything's fine. You know, there's always going to be a degree of challenges. That would be nice.
Yeah.
However, I do think there are some quite critical challenges at the moment, and it will be really interesting, and we are hopeful of what a new government can bring in to sort of make some changes and make some new commitments to social housing. So it's a real crux. We're at a point of change at the moment. It's too soon to say exactly what the new government will
Yeah.
do and mean, but we hope it will deliver against some of the challenges. So the most obvious challenge at the moment really is funding and security for social housing from the government. And that's both
Yes.
core grant funding, but also the security to invest and raise funds in the private sector. So it's not purely about handout here, but there does need to be a commitment from government to have secure rents, a secure policy of income, which means that housing, which generally operates on 10, 20, 30-year business plans, can actually know enough about, of course, there's going to be change, but it needs some certainty from government about rent formula and investment so that it can write those plans, pull down investment from private investors and have some certainty. So that really matters. Technical and operational challenges at the moment are largely to do with the cost of creating our homes to be net zero. So that is decarbonising our homes. That's about insulation, heating, the materials that are used to build and retrofit homes. So that's all our existing stock. How do you make that less or zero use energy, net zero rather, and new homes? How do you build them to be hyper energy efficient, almost zero bills on heating, etc.? Solar and new technologies coming in, air source heat pumps and all of that. That's by the millions and millions of homes, right, in England alone, which is where we work across. So that is no mean feat. And although there is some money in government, there's not enough, right? There's about 2-3 billion, maybe about another 2-3 coming through. That's about 5% of what's needed to actually decarbonise social housing in the UK. So more needs to be done, and you can't magic that money out from private investment, and you can't just create it from your surpluses in social housing, right? So if we're serious about net zero and decarbonisation, there needs to be more funding there. And basic safety, maintenance, repairs, all those things. As the cost of living has gone up, cost of materials and labour has gone up. We've all experienced that. That means everything is more expensive to do. So social housing has a higher bill in that area. So lots and lots of very real challenges for the sector right now.
Yeah, and this is why I keep coming back to housing as being such a critical linchpin in our economic development and our ability to be able to sustain that growth, because it starts with our people, and then it's central to our homes, and just those key things that we talked about, people having the security to grow a life around their community, to grow our communities. And then to think, well, this is our home. We can afford to stay in the home for the longer term, and the impact of the decarbonisation and the journey that we need to go on with that. Where do you, so like every time I think about this, it's like a Jenga block. You tackle one part of it, and then there's another block over here, and it's the balancing out of that. Where would you really begin in all of that? Is it with the people? Is it with construction, Lynsey? I mean, what's the starting point in tackling the economic challenges round about this?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot to unpack there, and it can feel so big. It's hard to know where to start, whether you're in central government or whether you're in local government or in a housing association as a director or chief exec. But there are clear business as usual things that social housing needs to do. It needs to build and or maintain homes. It needs to have a good relationship as a landlord with its tenants, and it needs to provide safe, healthy, pleasant communities, including the environs around those properties, to live in. That's what it needs to do as the baseline. In order to have healthy, well-balanced, thriving communities, you need people with opportunities and stability in those communities. So that's about, if you're working age, it's about opportunities to either, if school didn't work out for you, to look again at what your options are, to re-engage with learning, to be offered a job or get the chance towards employment, to be able to earn a living. and to be able to have a job with a decent salary, potentially a career pathway, and some guidance around you about how you do that. All of those things will contribute to you being a positive, happier person engaging in your community. The less of those things you have and the less support you have, the more isolated you become. And the worse both you are, and also the ability for you to engage and be a positive force in your community is probably diminished.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
reaching out to people who are, this is a statistical term. It's not a very nice name, really, but economically inactive is a very
Yes.
well-known term in government, and not particularly used, in kind of common chat. You wouldn't describe either yourself as anyone or anyone as economically inactive, but there are millions and millions of economically inactive people in our country for very many different reasons. It might be that you are you have caring responsibilities. You might not need to work. You might be quite wealthy. You might be a student, or you might be in the 2.5 to 3 million people estimated that are economically inactive, so not working, but who would like to work with the right support. And we must address people with the very many needs and sort of different kind of aspects of support that represents, that big number represents in our communities, to create communities that are thriving. This might be slightly, seeing a real virtue in some issues and problems, but talking back to the net zero, the decarbonisation, and the homes maintenance agenda, we see at Communities That Work a real opportunity to create a new workforce from existing communities where work and current workforce needs and demands are not being met, which is in net zero, decarbonisation, and all of those job roles. There are not enough people in the country to do those roles. And there are a lot of people who, with the right support at the right time, potentially go into those roles. Then they're not all, postgraduate architects and quantity surveyors. Very many of those job roles are about hands-on fitting, customer service, dealing with, other people, working in your local area, and everything in between. So, anyone with a decent bit of training and support could go into some of these roles, and they're new, and they're going to be in the tens to hundreds of thousands over the next decade or two. So we've got to do something nationally and locally about that, and harness that demand and create opportunities for local people where, right on their doorstep, or literally on their doorstep, work needs to be done. So it's not the only answer. There are very many other career paths and job types, but we would like to see a bit of a closer Venn diagram, that bit in the middle, where some of the workforce demand and need is actually met by some of those economically inactive people who want to work. So we're really keen on that, and also on working with all local employers right across an economic area, to make sure that social housing tenants and residents and wider communities are given the right support and linked to employers, and see those local opportunities as opportunities for them.
It's not just those people who are economically inactive either, is it, Lynsey? It's the people who are maybe at risk of becoming economically inactive. So where have we got industry change? Where have we got
we've seen
employment changes? Those are the things that are happening as well, where people might change their sort of mindset from, I am X. This is my career for life. I joined and I did my apprenticeship doing this thing, but no longer is that thing going to be a sustainable job for you. So how does that work with Communities That Work?
Well, we're interested in career change, and we, like you said, it's not always about school leavers. It's not always about people who've been unemployed for years and might have been in Job Centre Plus. It can be just people in working who are looking at opportunities and thinking about what they like and what they don't like, and what opportunities are local to them. So we don't do a great deal of policy work with the government on careers advice, and all the rest of it. But we are aware and interested in some of the changes they are proposing around careers advice and community level support. Most notably recently, and this followed some work from the Commission on the Future of Employment Support, which is a piece of work led by the Institute for Employment Studies. So sorry about all of those long words.
At least you're remembering it all.
Well, they're a
Put some
great
links in for
organisation. Well, name check Tony Wilson, who's the chief exec there of the IES, and he's led the commission. It's had external commissioners involved, and we've been involved in bringing the social housing sector to some of those conversations, including ensuring that tenant and resident voices fed into that commission. It has a great deal of recommendations to come through it, and only a few of them have been trailed. But one of them, which was trailed and which has been picked up by the Labour government, is a proposal to bring careers advice into Job Centre Plus services. Now, if and whether that will work and at what pace that will happen, I don't know. But we're really interested in the notion that on a high street or within a sort of reachable distance in any community, you could walk into or engage digitally with a service which you might be in or out of work, you might be part-time, you might be full-time but looking for something else, which can have a conversation with you, which reminds me of what Skills was doing, a conversation about what you're interested in, what you like, who are you, what do you want to do to make a living in life, what do you like and dislike about what you do now, and where could you go, what are your options and how could we help you get there. That's a totally different relationship to the one which most Job Centre Plus users have at the moment, which is they are a registered job seeker, they may be on universal credit and have a claimant commitment to fulfil, and they go in because they need to, but it's not necessarily about a whole person careers centred discussion. So it'd be really interesting to see what happens there. And we've also done some work with the Learning and Work Institute on career changes. So we were part of an informal advisory group on a piece of research they published not that long ago on making switches in careers, just as you said, Dina, so people might be looking a bit further afield, looking for ways in which they can use their skills differently. And the genus of this report was really a concern that because of COVID, some industries were hemorrhaging staff and other industries were growing, and was there a piece of work to be done to move people who may not have considered that their customer service skills in, say, a restaurant could be deployed in, say, a care home, and how you make that transition and what that means and what the skills pathway is. Of course, there's a million examples of how you might career change, but we're interested in that piece of work as well, and I'll continue to look at the incentives and the barriers for people, actually, both actual and perhaps mental, held within ourselves, that might prevent people from making a change from what they're used to.
I think that's really interesting, those mental barriers. We talk a lot in schools and education about growth mindset and being able to approach things with this kind of, I don't do that yet, I'm not that yet. But do we, I'm not always sure that we talk about our skills and careers in quite the same way sometimes. You maybe do a job and it's a job in a box without necessarily, that's the job you do. And do you think about the pathways for it?
I saw some really, it was just a small session with two different disparate parts of a business about 2 weeks ago. And they'd like new starts who were on a career pathway. They were knowledge sharing, but they were also speaking to other people who do very different things in their business. And there was almost this educational piece about the products and things that they work with their customers. But there was also this other additional piece of learning that kind of came out of the session about sharing what their career pathway had been and where they had started. And I think for a lot of the new people in the role, they were just thinking, oh, well, surely they'd gone to college, or surely they'd got some sort of university career to get as far along the career pathway. So I think this idea of people coming together and knowledge sharing about their own journeys, their own skills, their best careers advice that they've maybe been given, even, between a colleague or a friend even.
Absolutely.
I think it's important, and so I think the role that housing has to play in bringing those different parts of our society or businesses together. And I was also thinking as well, when we were talking about the decarbonisation, what role does the private sector have in helping public sector at this time better understand what is available to them, what will be coming, how we make these things more cost effective, and also about the roles that are emerging in their own industry. I think there's a lot of knowledge sharing that can be done, and in that way, and reaching out and showing people, hey, it's not just about the application form and the job title. These are real people. This is how I started my journey, and that might be from a skills boot camp or an apprenticeship, or it might be that they came in at their jobs like us from different angles, and it's the sum parts of the learning experiences that we've had along the way. So looking back over your shoulder as well, Lynsey, has there been anybody notable in your own career journey, or any piece of advice that you've ever been given that is stuck with you or lived with you?
Kind of. I've maybe like a few people at different points in my jobs and careers. I've had obviously had line managers, but also had kind of mentors and guides, and I find. So I would recommend trying to have an outside perspective, not your direct line manager, but maybe someone within work or near to your work that can see you and can talk to you in a way that might feel, you might feel slightly compromised to do with your line manager who signs off on X, Y, Z and who issued you with your contracts and all the rest of it. So I'd recommend having that and doing that. I've had some really amazing managers, men and women, over the years who've, backed me up, given me some trust and autonomy, probably because they saw that I needed that. And let me go forth and try things, make some mistakes, and deal with mistakes. You're not going to get everything right all the time. This isn't about real dreadful outcomes, but it's about being in a safe environment to kind of make a few mistakes or try a few things that you don't know if they'll work or not. So feel some confidence to do that. I've definitely sort of some real managers stick out who are basically really actively optimistic people, and not just because they had a sunny disposition or because nothing bad had ever happened in their life, but because they chose to be optimistic and they chose to be kind to other people and they chose to listen. And I think those are active skills. They're not just something you're born with. You either have it or you don't have it. Choose to do it. Choose to be optimistic. In a job that you're not sure about, choose to do it to the best of your ability, and make it as good as you can. You will get more out of it than if you just kick around in your head with, I don't really like this job. So try and just max it out, draw the good out of it, draw the good out of people, and develop relationships, talk to people, connect with other people at all times. And if you're not a particularly outgoing or extrovert person, that doesn't mean you've got to kind of go in with your party hat on and be the center of attention. No. It's just about finding a connection to somebody, whether that's on email, whether that's on a chat box, or whether that's in person near the coffee point, and just ask them about themselves, find out what they're doing, and just build your picture of where you are in the world of work. And make connections with other people, because they will support you. People do support other people on the whole. So go for it and trust them.
It's a lovely piece of advice. I love that, and it's part of that ripple effect. Dinah, you and I have talked about that a lot. It's about what you put out there, and then it's amazing what comes back. From those connections and those conversations, and you don't know until you have that conversation. So really,
you don't.
Really,
exactly. You really don't, do you? You can't know. No. You can't know what happens if you don't have a conversation with someone. You can only know what happens if you do have a conversation with someone. So always try it, and you
Exactly.
might have some real duds.
Yeah.
But hey, it is a bit like dating, isn't it? We're back to
It definitely is. And you've got to go in, like you say, you've got to go into those conversations with optimism. You have got to do that,
Yeah.
because you can't, go into it,
yeah,
it's the worst that could happen. Is this
absolutely
just going in with what could it be? Where could this take us? It could connect us to something brilliant, and bringing those dots closer together. I always think about people just, you've got so much power once you start connecting to each other and what you do, more so than when you're pulling apart, really. And it's got to be a better way to work.
I've put a really cheesy quote in the chat box as well. So this is for
right. We love a cheesy quote.
I did study some philosophy, and so I'm gonna have to. I can't get away from it. But and this comes up in a lot of kind of positive thinking books and planning your career stuff, and it's from a Greek guy called Epictetus. Not the most common name anymore, but this is a point about choosing optimism, really. So as we all know, right, good and bad things are going to happen to all of us. Nobody has a charmed and perfect life, and you can't always choose what's going to happen to you in your life, but you can nearly always choose what you do about that, how you respond to it in yourself, in your head and in your heart. So take that control. I would always say, as a piece of advice that was given to me, and I've tried to use, it's not about idealism, you can just magic all difficulties away, but it is about checking yourself about how you're dealing with the situation that's happening to you. And that might be people, or it might be things, or, stuff happening in your life. Think about how you're responding to it, and just try and respond positively, proactively, constructively. This is a hard process. You have to do it. It's like exercise. You have to engage in it. It's not just going to happen to you. So do that. Be active.
Sadly, no shortcuts to those things, are there?
You
have to do it. You have to do it. So where can people find out more, Lynsey, about communities that work?
Yeah, well, thank you. We love people getting in touch. There's really sort of basic ways of connecting with us, which is we do a monthly supporters newsletter. It's on our website, but you can subscribe to it, and it goes out monthly, and we would always welcome contributions. So there's obviously a contact point within that newsletter. So subscribe to our newsletter, please, anybody, everywhere. And if you're interested in our campaigning work, which in the new government is called A Future That Works. So that's about building a future that works for everybody. We have a campaign page, and I've shared the link, and please have a look at that. And if you're interested in that work, there's a little orange supporters button with a super fast 1-minute Google form behind it, which will allow you to show your support as an individual or an organisation, and also means that we will stay in touch with you on our work in our campaigning areas. So that might be events you'll get invited to, further contributions that you can make to our work, and meetings that we have, but you'll be more closely posted by signing up to the campaign. It's not for everyone, but we're really pleased when individuals, parliamentarians and organisations do come around it. So take a look at that, and if you're happy to show support there, please complete that orange button, tick the form through, and we'll be in touch. That's it, really. Obviously we're on X, Twitter and LinkedIn, and those two social channels, really. So connect to us there too.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's just been really interesting getting insight into what you're doing and the work that you're doing, and how you're trying to bring those different challenges together in one place. So it's really good.
Cheers. Thanks, Dina. Thanks, Kirsty. Nice to see you.
Thanks for listening to the Skillsminer Podcast. You can subscribe to follow our channel on YouTube, and you can find this podcast on Spotify.